On the church's calendar, Advent marks the beginning of a new year. So on this 8th day of the new year, which Advent marks, I'm thinking about starting afresh, beginning again. In essence, every Advent season strikes that same note of hope and grace, kind of like a clean slate, a do-over. And whenever I think of beginning again, starting over, being given a clean slate, being graced with a do-over, I think of that magnificent passage of Paul's second letter to the church at Corinth. In that 5th chapter of that second letter, it reads, "From now on, therefore, we regard no one from a human point of view, even though we once knew Christ from a human point of view. We know him no longer in that way. So if anyone is in Christ, there is a new creation. Everything old has passed away. See, everything has become new. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and has given us the ministry of reconciliation." That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting the message of reconciliation to us. So we are ambassadors for Christ. Since God is making the appeal through us, we entreat you, therefore, on behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. For just a moment, allow me to highlight and cast a spotlight on the practical wisdom and the glorious principle of reconciliation that Paul proclaims to the Corinthians and to us. Allow me to do so by highlighting the 3 R's of reconciliation. First, regard. Regard others as Christ regards them, as precious creations of God. Look on others in a Christ-like way, whether they are different from you, religiously or sexually or sociopolitically. Regard them in a Christ-like way. Regard every person as a precious creation from God's own gracious and holy hand. Secondly, remember that God's main working paper is to reconcile the world. The word in Greek for reconciliation is katalagete, meaning be reconciled, be made whole, be part of the whole family of God's household, no longer counting their trespasses against them. God has done it. God has made us right in Christ Jesus. And now we have been given the responsibility to be made right with all other human beings. Thirdly, repeat. Repeat the good news message of reconciliation. What do you do with a message you've been given? Simple. You repeat it. So we are to repeat the message of reconciliation to any and all as long as we have breath. You know, I'm not sure I would have been as gracious as God was in Christ. I think it's really much simpler to set up the world with an us against them dichotomy and simply distrust and disregard and dismiss whoever is the other, the opponent, the different one, the so-called enemy. I'm sure my adversaries would be different than those encountered by other folks, but I'd just be just as sinfully slimy if I was left to my own designs. I'd love to blast certain entities to smithereens and send them to perdition for their seeming, apparent, incessant malfeasances. But God didn't do that, did God? No, God simply reconciled the world to God's self. And since God did so, I can't ever blast anyone. Which leads me to this conclusion. Those who commit all sorts of hellish acts or express reprehensible attitudes or opinions, or who express such sickening condemnation toward people who are different from them, are not outside of God's grace either. They too are among those whom God reconciled, whether they humbly acknowledge that fact or not. It is enough if we do so for them on their behalf. Be reconciled, brothers and sisters. Be reconciled this Advent season.